The needle was already in her arm when Dean walked in. He hadn't knocked. He never knocked at Marilyn's place on Fifth Helena Drive. That was the arrangement between old friends, the kind of unspoken agreement that gets built over years of shared laughter and late dinners and the particular intimacy of people who have seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. You don't knock for family. You don't announce yourself to someone who already knows your footsteps on the porch. But the man standing over Marilyn Monroe on that Tuesday afternoon in the spring of 1962 was not family. He was Dr. Ralph Greenson, psychiatrist, analyst, appointed guardian of her interior life. And the syringe in his hand caught the afternoon light in a way that made Dean Martin's stomach do something it hadn't done since the war. Marilyn didn't look up. She couldn't. Her head was tilted back against a green velvet armchair, like a woman who had surrendered to gravity as a philosophical position. Her famous hair was loose and uncombed, splayed across the cushion in damp strands. Her lips were parted, not in the way that suggested sleep, but in the way that suggested whatever held the body together had temporarily stepped outside. Her hands rested open in her lap, palms up like an offering nobody had accepted. Dean. Greenson's voice arrived before he turned around. Measured, cool, the temperature of a room that hasn't had its windows opened in months. You're early. She's supposed to be on set in 40 minutes, Dean said. He didn't move from the doorway. He was a man who understood the value of a threshold, the way standing in one told the other person that you hadn't decided yet whether to commit to the room. She needs rest. Greenson withdrew the syringe with the practiced ease of a man performing a gesture he'd repeated so many times that the moral weight of it had long since been distributed across routine and disappeared. He capped the needle without looking at it. He set it on the silver tray beside the chair with particular delicacy of someone who respects his tools. She needed rest yesterday, Dean said, and the day before. She has anxiety, Dean. Greenson finally turned to face him. He was a lean man in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of face that academic credentials had arranged into permanent authority. His eyes were the warm, attentive brown of a man who had trained himself to appear as if he was always listening. You know this. She's told you herself. The anxiety is debilitating. We're managing it. Dean looked at Marilyn. He looked at the specific geography of her stillness, the way her chest rose and fell with a rhythm that seemed externally imposed rather than organic, the way her eyelids fluttered without opening, like a woman dreaming instructions she didn't write. He looked at the bruise forming in the crook of her left elbow, a purple-yellow continent on her pale skin, and he understood with a cold, clarifying certainty that it was not the first bruise and not the second, and that he had been telling himself it was nothing because the alternative was a fight he didn't know the shape of yet. What did you give her? Dean asked. Sodium amytal. It's prescribed. It's therapeutic. It facilitates a kind of deep emotional access that allows us to make real progress in. She has a scene to learn. The scene will wait. The scene, Dean said slowly, does not wait. The studio does not wait. Billy Wilder does not wait. 45 people on that set do not wait. He paused. Marilyn does not wait, because Marilyn is the whole reason any of those people have jobs this week. Greenson's expression shifted. Not much, just a millimeter. But Dean had spent 30 years reading rooms, and he caught it. It was a shift of a man recalculating, not reconsidering. The difference was everything. She'll be ready tomorrow, Greenson said. Dean looked at Marilyn one final time. He looked at the open palms, at the unheld hands, at the woman who had walked into auditions when she was 19 with nothing but her face and her hunger and a talent so raw it left marks on everyone who got close, and who was now sitting in her own living room with someone else's chemistry running through her veins on a Tuesday afternoon when she had somewhere to be. He left without saying goodbye. Goodbyes imply a return under the same conditions. He was already changing the conditions. He sat in his car outside her house for 11 minutes. He counted because counting gave his hand something to do that wasn't breaking things. Dean Martin had built an entire public identity around ease, the looseness of a man for whom everything was a little funny, for whom the glass was always half full, because someone charming had just arrived to fill it. But that ease was always performance layered over something harder and more deliberate underneath. The real Dean Martin was a kid from Steubenville, Ohio, who had fought and scrambled and reinvented himself so many times that he understood, at the molecular level, what it looked like when someone was being quietly dismantled. He drove to the studio. He found Paula Strasberg in her trailer, and he asked her, with the conversational lightness of a man making small talk, "When did Marilyn start missing calls?" Paula looked at him with the exhausted eyes of a woman who had been asking herself the same question and arriving at answers she didn't like. She said January, early January. Before that, she was difficult. She was always difficult. That was part of the genius. The difficulty was inseparable from the gift, but before January, she was present. After January, she arrived to set like a signal that was losing its source. Dean asked 3 more people. Different words. Same month. Same answer. January. He went home and opened his desk drawer and found the calendar he kept for scheduling purposes, and he counted backward from January, and he found the date that Greenson had, according to Marilyn's own enthusiastic description, at a dinner party in November, increased his sessions with her from twice weekly to 4 times weekly. He had called it an intensive therapeutic phase. He had explained it as a response to a breakthrough that required sustained follow-through. Dean called a friend who worked at Cedars-Sinai. He described the bruising pattern, the specific location, the specific coloration, the frequency. He described the quality of Marilyn's absence, which was not the absence of sadness or the absence of intoxication, but something more precise, the absence of authorship, like a woman who was still broadcasting but had lost control of the signal. His friend listened without interrupting. "How many times a week?" the friend asked. "At least 3 that I've seen. Probably more." A silence opened on the line that had weight to it. Sodium amytal isn't a maintenance medication, Dean. It's not something you administer repeatedly for generalized anxiety. It's a barbiturate. It's a dissociative agent. In controlled settings it's been used for, he stopped himself, recalibrated. It suppresses the patient's critical faculties. It makes them suggestible. It makes them compliant. Another pause. Who has oversight here? Who's countersigning prescriptions? He is. He's her psychiatrist, her analyst, her primary physician of record, and he holds medical power of attorney over her care decisions. The silence this time was different, denser, the kind of silence that means someone has arrived somewhere they didn't want to go. "Dean," the friend said quietly, "that's not a therapeutic relationship. That's a closed system. That's a man with total access and zero accountability, and a patient whose credibility has been systematically." He stopped again. If she ever tried to tell someone, her own documented history would be used against her. Her breakdowns, her hospitalizations, everything she's ever said in a session would be as to frame. Dean said, "I know." His friend said, "I can't put any of this in writing." Dean said, "I know that too." He went back 3 days later. He knocked this time. He was changing the terms of his access, building a new architecture for these visits, because the old one had assumed goodwill on all sides, and he was no longer assuming anything. Marilyn answered the door in a white silk robe, her hair loose, moving through the afternoon with the specific, unhurried quality of someone operating in a slightly different time zone than the rest of the world. She smiled when she saw him. The smile was real. That was the cruelest detail. The way the warmth in her was so fundamental that it survived even this fog, even this managed diminishment. And she was still trying to be glad when someone she loved appeared at her door. She touched his cheek. "Dino, you look worried." "I am a little." "Don't be." She turned back into the house, and he followed. "Ralph says I'm making real progress." Ralph. The first name familiarity of it landed in Dean's chest like a stone into still water. Not like a doctor, not even like a friend, like a landlord who would convince his tenant that the locked doors were for her protection. Progress from what? Dean asked. He kept his voice neutral. This was important. If she felt the edge of what he was thinking, she would offend Greenson before she'd examine him. Because Greenson had spent 18 months making himself the only fully trustworthy figure in her constellation. Marilyn settled onto the sofa and thought about it. The thinking itself was telling. The way she had to reach for the answer, the way it didn't live on the surface where it should have. The fear, she said finally. Ralph says I have a fundamental fear of abandonment that distorts all my relationships. He's helping me work through the root causes." She said it with a cadence of recitation. Those were not her words arranged by her. Those were his words, transplanted. And the injections are part of that. They help me be open. She smiled, a little dreamy. "He says my defenses are very strong. He says the medication helps us get past the defenses to the real work." Dean sat down. He looked at the coffee table. He counted, without touching, without moving anything. 6 prescription bottles arranged in a loose cluster near the ashtray. Nembutal, chloral hydrate, the amytal he already knew about, phenobarbital, 2 he didn't recognize. A pharmacological committee all voting toward the same outcome. A woman quieter, softer, less capable of the kind of sharp and inconvenient self-assertion that makes patients difficult and inconvenient and hard to manage. When did he start coming every day? Dean asked. Marilyn frowned. Not at him, at the question, at the gap between what she thought was true and what she was being asked to verify. He doesn't come every day. Monday, he was here when I called at 2. Thursday, I drove by at noon, and his car was out front. Saturday, your housekeeper mentioned he'd been here twice. Sunday morning. You've been checking, she said. Something moved behind her eyes. Not anger. Something more complicated and more painful. The particular discomfort of a person who is beginning, against their will, to see the shape of something they've been told isn't there. I've been paying attention, Dean said carefully. There's a difference. She looked at her hands for a long moment. He says no one else understands me the way he does. Dean said nothing. He says most people see the image. He sees the person underneath. Dean said nothing. He says, she stopped. She had heard it herself. Finally, the accumulated weight of all those, he says, stacking up like bricks in a wall. She hadn't noticed being built around her. She looked up at Dean with an expression that was the beginning of something he recognized as clarity, and also as fear, and also as a particular grief of a woman who has begun to suspect that the person she trusted most with her interior life has been using her interior life as raw material for something else entirely. I need some water, she said, and went to the kitchen, and Dean heard the tap run for a long time. He started going through her trash. He was not proud of this. He held no illusions about the dignity of the act. A famous entertainer in a suit crouched over a kitchen garbage can at 7 a.m. while Marilyn slept upstairs. But he had run out of dignified options, and pride is a luxury that disappears when someone you love is in danger they can't see. The first 3 visits produced nothing except a portrait of a woman's daily life in pieces. Champagne bottles, sleeping pill wrappers, studio call sheets, crumpled notes in Marilyn's handwriting with lines from scripts she was trying to memorize, love letters she'd started and abandoned, grocery lists that began with vegetables and ended with vodka. The 4th visit produced a prescription pad. It had been torn in half, and then each half had been torn in half again, and then the 4 quarters had been deposited under coffee grounds in a Chinese takeout container, and a section of the Los Angeles Times folded open to the entertainment page. This was either extreme carelessness or the action of a man so armored in his own untouchability that the concept of genuine concealment felt like beneath him. Dean took the pieces home. He taped them together on his kitchen table under the bright overhead light, smoothing the edges with the side of his thumb, fitting the pieces together like a man constructing evidence of something he had been hoping would turn out to be nothing. It was a prescription for chloral hydrate. The dosage was substantial, enough to sedate a person significantly larger than Marilyn, enough that its repeated use in combination with the other medications would create effects that no single prescription justified on its own. It was signed with Greenson's name and DEA number. The patient listed was not Marilyn Monroe. The patient listed was Greenson's wife. Dean sat with that for a long time. He sat with it through a glass of scotch and halfway through a second. He sat with it until the shape of it fully assembled itself in his mind. Not just what it was, but what it meant, what the architecture it revealed about the whole structure. The prescriptions were being laundered. Medications prescribed to family members, to other patients, were being sourced through multiple channels and administered to Marilyn. Off-record, untraceable, deniable. She was receiving dosages that no single prescription authorized, through channels that left no unified paper trail. And because Greenson held her medical power of attorney, because he was simultaneously her psychiatrist and her analyst and her primary physician and her emergency contact and the person who answered calls from the studio when she couldn't get out of bed. There was no external check on any of it. The system had no outside. It was a sealed room, and he had the only key, and he had convinced her that the locked door was the definition of safety. And she was Marilyn Monroe. She was a woman whose instability had been documented by Greenson himself in Greenson's own clinical notes, so thoroughly and so persistently that any accusation she made against him would be processed through that documentation first. She would be the unreliable narrator of her own abuse, the very record of her vulnerability, which he had been building and curating for 18 months, was the mechanism of her containment. It was not medicine. It was architecture. It was a cage built from the vocabulary of care. Dean picked up the phone. He called the journalist first. Not a gossip columnist, not a friend of the column, a journalist, the specific kind who takes 3 months to verify a single fact and who would rather spike a story than print something that couldn't survive a legal assault from the most expensive lawyers in Los Angeles. He met him at a diner in Burbank on a Thursday morning, and he explained what he'd found and what he suspected and what he could and couldn't prove, and he slid the taped-together prescription fragment across the table in an envelope. The journalist looked at it for a long time. "This alone isn't a story," the journalist said. "It's a prescription with an irregular patient name. There are explanations. I know. I would need corroborating documentation. I would need a source inside the medical establishment. I know what you need," Dean said. "I'm not asking you to print anything yet. I'm asking you to start looking. Because if something happens to her before anyone is looking, the looking becomes much harder." He paused. "And something is going to happen to her. I can feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives." The journalist pocketed the envelope. Dean drove from the diner directly to Greenson's office on Roxbury Drive in Beverly Hills. He had not made an appointment. He walked past a receptionist, a young woman who opened her mouth and then closed it when she read something in Dean Martin's forward momentum that suggested an appointment with a formality that had already been superseded. And he opened a door to the inner office and walked in. Greenson was at his desk. He looked up. His expression did the thing Dean had been watching for: the micro-adjustment, the rapid internal calculation, the decision about which version of himself to deploy. He landed on cordial. It was a miscalculation. "Dean," he said, "this is unusual. I found your prescription pad," Dean said. He sat down in the patient's chair. The irony of the positioning was not lost on him. And he placed his hands flat on his knees, and he looked at Greenson with complete and focused attention of a man who has nothing left to perform, the one from Maryland's trash, with your wife's name on the chloral hydrate order. The room became a specific kind of quiet, the kind that has edges. "That's a serious accusation," Greenson said. His voice had not changed. That was impressive, in a way, the composure of a man who had rehearsed for this moment. Not because he expected it, but because men who build systems like the one he'd built understand, in some corner of themselves, that systems eventually attract scrutiny. "Here's what I want," Dean said. "I don't want money. I don't want a confession. I don't want a conversation about what you have or haven't done, because that conversation won't go anywhere useful for either of us." He leaned forward slightly. "I want you to release every form of authority you hold over Marilyn Monroe's medical care, the power of attorney, the emergency contact designation, the primary physician of record, all of it. You refer her to someone else, someone she chooses, not someone you choose for her, and you do it this week, and you do it quietly, and you tell her it's because you've recognized a boundary issue that requires a fresh clinical perspective, which is actually true in a way." Greenson studied him. "And if I decline to restructure my patient's care based on the demands of an entertainer with no standing in medical matters, then I call my friend at the Times and I tell him to stop looking and start writing." Dean stood up. He buttoned his jacket. "You build an entire structure around the idea that no one would believe her over you. You made yourself the only trustworthy voice in her life, and then use her trust as a raw material. That's very clever." He moved to the door. The problem with very clever structures is that they're built for a world where nobody looks too closely. "I looked." He paused with his hand on the door. "She's the most photographed woman alive. Everything that happens to her happens in public. And the public has a very particular relationship with Marilyn Monroe. If she gets hurt, if anything happens to her, the volume of scrutiny that descends on everyone in her life will be extraordinary. You don't want to be the man who was closest. He opened the door. You want to be the man who recognized a boundary issue and made a professional referral. He left. He did not look back. Looking back invites negotiation, and he was finished negotiating. Greenson filed the paperwork transferring Marilyn's primary care designation 9 days later. The letter he sent to the studio, to the producer, and to Marilyn's lawyer cited the recognized therapeutic value of fresh clinical perspective after an intensive period of treatment and professional boundary considerations that, in retrospect, required earlier attention. It was the language of a man performing orderly retreat. It said nothing that admitted anything. It was the most carefully constructed piece of writing Dean had ever not read, because he had Marilyn's lawyer read it to him over phone. Marilyn called Dean the evening she received her own copy. "Did you do this?" she asked. "I had a conversation with Ralph." Among others, a long silence. He could hear her breathing. The particular quality of it, present and attentive in a way it hadn't been in months. The fog was beginning to lift. Not all the way, not yet, but the direction was right. "I'm angry," she said. "I know." He was helping me. He understood things about me that. He documented things about you. Dean said gently, "It's not the same thing." Another silence, longer. He let it be long. He didn't fill it with reassurance or explanation because she needed the silence more than she needed him to be right about anything. "The fear is still here," she said finally. Her voice was very quiet. "Whatever he was giving me, it didn't fix the fear. It just made it distant, like watching something through thick glass. And now the glass is gone and the fear is right there again. I don't know what to do with it." "I know," Dean said. "That's not very helpful." "No," he agreed. "But the fear is yours now. That's the difference. It's not being managed by somebody else for purposes you don't know about. It's just yours. And things that are yours, you can actually do something about." He paused. Eventually, she laughed. A small, tired laugh, but real. The genuine article. "You're impossible, Dino." "So I've been told." "Thank you," she said, very quietly, as if the word cost something. "Don't thank me yet," Dean said. "Get some sleep, real sleep, the kind nobody prescribes." Greenson never publicly acknowledged what had happened. He continued his practice. He wrote papers. He gave lectures. He was, by all outward appearances, a respected clinician who made a professional judgment call about a famous patient's care transition. The journalists ran nothing, because without Greenson's access to Marilyn, the trail of irregular prescriptions grew cold. The sources went quiet, and the story that had been assembling itself on a kitchen table in Burbank scattered back into deniable fragments. Dean never talked about it publicly, not once, not to anyone outside a very small circle. He was not a man who needed the credit. He needed the outcome. He wanted her alive and present and in possession of herself. And for several months, through the spring into the early summer, he had something close to that. She was working. She was late and difficult and brilliant in the way she'd always been. And the difficulty and the brilliance were inseparable again, the way they were supposed to be. He would call her on Sundays. They would talk about nothing. Movies they'd seen, restaurants, the particular absurdity of the entertainment industry. The things she was reading. She was reading a lot. She had always read more than people assumed. She had always been, underneath the image that the world had built over her like a second skin, a person with seriously interior life. Curious, funny, genuinely intelligent, and perpetually underestimated by people who looked at the surface and stopped. "I keep thinking about what you said," she told him one Sunday in June, "about the fear being mine." "What about it?" "I think I've been trying to outsource it my whole life," she said. "Give it to someone else to hold. Joe held it for a while. Arthur held it for a while. Ralph was supposed to hold it." A pause. "The problem is when they hold it, they get to decide what to do with it." "Yeah," Dean said. "I think maybe you have to hold your own fear. I think that's probably right. It's very uncomfortable. Most true things are." She laughed. "When did you get philosophical?" I've always been philosophical, Dean said. I just do it with better material. She was found on the 4th of August, 1962. The cause of death recorded on the certificate was acute barbiturate poisoning. The bottles found at the scene were from 2 different physicians. Greenson's name appeared on none of them. He had been, in the intervening months, meticulous about maintaining a distance that was deniable and documented. The coroner's report would later be disputed, amended, debated by investigators and journalists and conspiracy theorists and historians for the next 6 decades, each new examination adding detail without resolution, each new document suggesting a picture more complicated than the official record admitted. Dean Martin never spoke publicly about what he had found in her trash or what he had said in Greenson's office. He carried it in a particular way that men of his generation carried things that couldn't be fixed. Quietly, without ceremony, without the relief of an audience. He kept the taped-together prescription fragment in the back of his desk drawer for the rest of his life. Not as evidence. Evidence needs a trial. There was no trial. He kept it as a record of conversation that happened, and a few months that had been real, and a woman who had, for a little while, in the spring of 1962, held her own fear in her own hands. She had been right. It was very uncomfortable. He had been right, too. It was hers. The difference, in the end, was everything, and also, in the end, not enough. The last thing Dean told her, the last Sunday phone call before August, before everything, "You're doing okay, you know." And she said, "I know. That's what scares me. I keep waiting for someone to take it away." He didn't tell her they already had. Once. He didn't tell her the world was full of people who would try again. He just said, "Don't let them." And she laughed and said she'd try and hung up the phone. And that was that.